The crackling of the campfire and ambience of crickets was all that filled the night as Ganyu lay flat on her back next to her beloved, both of them admiring the night sky while Yelan had long since passed out. Ganyu had fancied herself with a dinner of freshly picked sweet flowers with a side of apples she had collected from trees along their way to their current location, while Keqing and Yelan had dined on a serving of meat from a boar that Yelan had killed. While a vegetarian, Ganyu hadn't minded the slightest, her small variety of plants and fruits being more than enough to savor her appetite. Keqing had felt bad eating in front of her, but after several times of saying it was fine, only then did Keqing eat her food. With full stomachs and exhausted from traveling, all three had called it a night right after sunset. However, Ganyu and Keqing had wanted to spend a while together after 2 weeks of separation, so they had cuddled up on the ground and enjoyed the natural beauty of the night together. "I think I see the constellation of your birth month, Ganyu," Keqing said excitedly. "Oh? Where?" Ganyu questioned. "Right there," Keqing replied, directing Ganyu by pointing her right index finger towards the starry sky. Ganyu followed her beloved's direction and quickly found what she was looking at. A star formation of a bow-wielding centaur, Sagittarius. "Good eye, my love," Ganyu congratulated. "Now, let me see if I can spy yours." Ganyu turned her head back to the massive sea of twinkling lights and focused hard to find the constellation of Scorpio, quickly finding the formation of a scorpion not too far from her own. "Ah, there it is," Ganyu said, pointing her finger in the direction of her discovery. "Right next to yours." Keqing blushed at the sentiment, adding her own comment. "Good job. I never realized they were so close to one another. It's almost as if fate destined us to be together from the very beginning of our lives." Ganyu adorned her own blush, turning to meet her beloved's gaze. "Given what I witnessed during my trial, I honestly wouldn't doubt it one bit," Ganyu added, following a cute chuckle as the starter to her next words. "After all, I wouldn't trade you for anyone else in the world." "Nor would I. Even if things didn't start the best, we found our way here tonight under the beautiful night sky." "This brings back memories of when we went on all those missions together. Hard to believe back then we secretly had feelings for each other and managed to somehow keep them hidden for as long as we did. It's crazy to think of, especially considering some of the things we did on those missions." "Indeed. I remember when I forgot to bring a change of clothes when I fell into that mud pit in that hilly troll camp, and you offered yours just so I wouldn't have to travel in muddy clothing. And I accidentally walked upon you while you were still changing. That was one embarrassing day, and I felt horrible for it. So I had Baiwen deliver you an apology gift I'd arranged in secrecy. Your favorite Liyue delicacy." Keqing winced at the comment, having remembered the day she'd received a serving of golden shrimp balls in a freshly weaved basket from some secret sender. "Wait, that was from you?" Keqing stated in surprise. Ganyu nodded as a response, a light blush adorning her face. "I always wondered where that gift basket came from, and even conducted a secret search to find out. You really felt that bad about that incident?" "Yes, and to be completely honest, I thought you were mad at me, but I eventually just let it go. Seeing on missions afterwards, you never seemed like you despised me for it." Ganyu. Of course I wasn't mad. While it definitely was embarrassing, I knew just by your reaction and several apologies that it was just an accident. "I know. And while I had already realized that you hadn't harbored any ill will towards me about it, I still felt bad and wanted to make it up to you somehow." Keqing rolled her eyes at the comment, smiling at the cute confession. Well, it wasn't necessary. Thank you, Kuching said sweetly. The golden shrimp balls were delectable. You're welcome, my love, Ganyu replied, following with Kuching continuing to reminisce about the days when Liyue Harbor still existed and was lively with hundreds of people. She let out a long breath of nostalgic thought before speaking again. Those were the days, weren't they? Back when the world wasn't on the brink of destruction, and every day didn't feel as if it could potentially be our last. However, there is still one thing I do wonder about the current world, had Liyue Harbor not been destroyed that night. And what is that? Ganyu questioned, curious about the statement herself. Would we have ended up together if nothing ever changed? That question made Ganyu wince. It was actually a great question, seeing before this whole mess, she did her best to not cross Kuching's path, unless Ningguang had put her in a situation where she had to work with her. However, was that urge to avoid her out of respect to not bother her in her work as the Yuheng, or because her feelings for Kuching were strong, but she wouldn't dare confess them? She'd never paid her feelings any mind because of her assumption that Kuching would not see her that way and wasn't someone who preferred romantic engagement with a partner of the same sex. However, upon gazing at Kuching again, outside of her thoughts, she knew exactly how to answer the question her partner was speculating. Honestly, everyone's lives follow the path that fate chose for them. And considering we are together now, I believe that we would have eventually confessed to one another regardless. How it would have eventually happened, well, that doesn't really matter now, because this is the reality we're living in. Kuching's curiosity faded like a mist, realizing that Ganyu had answered perfectly. What could have been didn't matter anymore, because this was their reality and what fate had led them to. There was no changing the past, and all that mattered now was that they were together and loved each other dearly to the ends of the world. She smiled and answered her beloved. You're right. And despite how things would have played out if all of this wouldn't have happened, I'm proud to say that I'm happy with you in this world. Kuching complimented, following with giving her love a sweet kiss. Ganyu returned it, the sentiment causing Kuching to start wanting to take their engagement further. Ganyu's hormones were raging as well in desperation of wanting to follow. However, she knew that they couldn't. The risk of potentially waking Yelan was too high. So, slightly drunk from Kuching's kiss, she broke her lock with her beloved's lips and addressed her lover's tendencies. Trust me, I want to, but we can't. At least, not tonight. While Kuching's body wanted to just ignore Ganyu's statement to not proceed, her senses listened to reason. I'm sorry. Kuching apologized. I don't know what came over me. Ganyu just shook her head, showing that she wasn't mad or offended. No need to apologize. 2 weeks is a long time for your body to wait, and my own is desperate as well. Don't worry. When we get an opportunity, I promise I won't hold back and give you all of my love. Kuching nodded with a smile. All right, but I expect you to keep that promise. She played, causing Ganyu to giggle. It's a deal. Ganyu teased back. Now, let's get some sleep. Kuching nodded, letting out a yawn unexpectedly and scooting closer to Ganyu. She buried her face into her love's warm chest, to which Ganyu put her right arm around Kuching's body and held her tight. I love you, Kuching stated before closing her eyes to slumber. Sweet dreams, my love. Ganyu closed the night by planting a light kiss on Kuching's forehead. Then she led her beloved deep into sleep. I love you too. Good night, my beloved. Warm and settled against the one she loved the most, Kuching lowered her eyelids and allowed Ganyu's heartbeat to lead her into her dreams. In minutes, Kuching was out and emitting soft breaths onto Ganyu's chest. Ganyu wasn't far behind, having stayed awake a little longer to admire her slumbering beauty against her body. She was the most beautiful thing to her in this world, something she would protect to the ends of Teyvat. A yawn escaped her mouth, to which she listened to her body and shut her eyes. Sweet dreams, my precious Kuching. The following morning, all three of them had awoken early to the rising of the sun, having satisfied their bellies with some eggs that Yelan had managed to capture from birds' nests within the vicinity of their camp. They had wanted to get an early start to the day to make good time upon their arrival in Sumeru City, and after a few more hours of traversing the Liyue wilderness, had arrived at the archway of their destination. Immediately, Ganyu and Kuching noticed a huge difference in comparison to their first trip, the security and demeanor of the city as a whole seeming much more organized and set up for something of importance. It was clear as day that Yelan's alliance with the Dendral capital had left an impact, and upon one of the guards noticing said comrade, she was approached and questioned. "Welcome back to Sumeru City, Miss Yelan," the guard said nicely. "Do you need to speak with any of our officials? I can escort you if needed." "Greetings, Yahama." Yelan greeted back. "No need for the escort, but I do need to speak to someone of great importance about something." "Of course. Just tell me who, and I'll see to it immediately." "Lesser Lord Kusanali." Yelan stated directly, causing the guard to jump lightly. Oh, well, I wasn't expecting that of all of our officials, but no matter. Please follow me to the sanctuary of Surislana, and I'll get you acquainted with our Archon." Yelan nodded in understanding, then began to follow Yahama up to the highest point of the entire city with her comrades in tow. The walk took about 6 minutes, but at long last, they'd reached the domain of the Dendral Archon, Ganyu and Kuching amazed at the building's architecture. It fit the role of being the domain of a god very well, appearing ancient and of a sacred nature to whomever it housed. "Wait here," Yahama commanded lightly, turning to and entering the sanctuary in a professional manner. Now alone and out of earshot of any potential imposters, Yelan turned to her comrades and spoke on something they weren't expecting. "I want you two to be prepared for what you're about to see, seeing it's likely going to surprise you." Ganyu and Kuching were immediately lost, Kuching speaking first on the odd heads up that they'd been delivered. "What do you mean? We've met Archon several times, so this shouldn't be anything different." Yelan merely shook her head at the words, knowing full well Kuching was far from right about her assumption of this meeting being the same as any other with an Archon. "Just watch and you'll see what I mean," Yelan stated, closing the brief conversation and leaving Kuching lost. As if it were scripted, Yahama exited the building and gave them the green light to enter in the form of a wave of her right arm. Without any hesitation, the trio followed the command and walked from the outside of the peak of Sumeru City into the sanctuary of Surislana. Upon seeing the inside of the building, Ganyu and Kuching were amazed at the infrastructure, the whole of it being a single wide walkway to a spherical structure in the middle. Off to the sides were other paths that branched from the center. Nothing but a fall of over 10 stories off to the side of each, with no railing to prevent accidental stumbles. With that factor in mind, the trio moved carefully towards the structure in the middle of the tall, wide, and long room, assuming said fixture to be the Archon's throne. However, upon seeing the only being that occupied the inside, Ganyu and Kuching immediately caught onto Yelan's intent and reason for forewarning them. In the center of the massive practical throne was a small girl with long white hair dressed with traditional fixtures, large green eyes, and dressed in attire that was the only possible indicator that she was someone of royalty. A sight that had taken the two aback and caused them to experience a serious reality check. This was definitely not what either of them had been expecting, but regardless of her appearance, they followed through by holding their professionalism. They approached the outer barrier of the assumed throne of the Little Archon and bowed as an act of respect.
"Oh, no need for the pleasantries."
The Archon spoke in the voice of a young toddler, catching Ganyu and Kuching off guard.
"Any friend of Miss Yelan is a friend of mine. The pleasure is ours."
Kuching spoke professionally.
"My name is Kuching, and this is my partner, Ganyu." "Oh, I already knew that, seeing Miss Yelan told me of you two during her last time here."
Kusanali explained.
"It's a pleasure to finally meet you both."
The manner of the Dendral Archon surprised both Ganyu and Kuching, seeing while she held the appearance and voice of a 5-year-old girl, she acted as if she were of an adult age. Yelan had not been wrong about this encounter being something you need to prepare mentally for.
"How have things been here, Your Highness?"
Yelan questioned, allowing the conversation to shift without any awkwardness, to which Ganyu and Kuching were relieved.
"For the most part, it's been quiet since the last attack that occurred during your last visit here. Regardless, we've remained on guard to assure that no other threats make it into Sumeru."
That's great to hear. That means our efforts paid off, and another nation has been spared eradication. Luckily, it's been likewise on my end. But matters regarding the war are not why I've requested to speak with you today.
"Oh? Then what do you need?"
To put it simply, if you're capable of it, I need your help to determine if a dream Ganyu had was either just a dream or what she thinks was a message from the Tsaritsa herself. Yelan followed with explaining the details of everything relevant to the situation, giving Lesser Lord Kusanali time to analyze and understand everything correctly. While the young god had been taken aback by the whole predicament, being the god of wisdom, she was able to understand the majority of it. However, she decided to double-check to see if her analysis of the debacle was right or not.
"So, you essentially need my assistance to confirm if Miss Ganyu's experience was real or not by delving into her psyche?"
Correct. But first, are you even capable of such a task, Your Highness?
"I am, but I must also mention that the act of mind delving is extremely dangerous to both the host and the one performing it. It is something that should only be performed under extremely necessary circumstances, seeing it can potentially cause damage to the host's memory if done improperly."
What if I told you it affected the entire outcome of the current situation we are all in? This could determine whether or not our supposed enemy is actually even our enemy at all. Kusanali jumped, knowing that Yelan wasn't feeding her nonsense. The look on her face went from unsure to something that reflected that this case was of high importance.
"I think I'm starting to understand exactly what's going on, and I'm glad you decided to come here before marching into our enemy's territory. However, the fact that this is a very daunting task still makes me want to determine certain things before potentially damaging Miss Ganyu's memory for good."
Following those words, Kusanali turned her attention to Ganyu.
"Miss Ganyu, I'd like to ask you some questions before I decide anything regarding entering your mind." "Oh, sure."
Ganyu answered, having jumped at the call of her name.
"The first thing I want to address is, now that I've stated the potential risks of doing this, do I have your permission to do so? Shall I have to delve into your mind?"
Ganyu didn't need to contemplate, seeing she was still under Rex Lapis's contract and had a duty to fight for the people of not just Liyue, but all of Teyvat. While it may damage some of her memories, she was willing to risk it.
"Yes." While it is dangerous, my duty is to protect and fight for the people of Teyvat. If this is necessary to fight for the right cause, I will do it.
The small goddess nodded at the answer. Then she proceeded with her next question.
All right, now that I have your approval, I am going to ask some questions that might be enough to determine the truth of the matter. First, while you were in the dreamscape, were you self-aware of everything around you and everything that was happening?
Upon hearing the question clearly, Ganyu didn't even need to think twice to know her answer. She remembered everything in the encounter detail for detail and word for word as if it were a regular occurrence in reality. Therefore, she confidently gave the Archon her answer.
Yes. While it was slightly disorienting at first, once I had managed to focus fully on my surroundings, it felt as if I were still in reality fully awake.
Kusanali nodded her head, then, without any pause, proceeded to her next question.
Very good. Now, during your encounter, did you notice any particular abnormalities at any moment?
Kusanali questioned again. Immediately, Ganyu was confused. She wasn't quite sure what the Archon before her meant by abnormalities. Therefore, to get a clear perspective of the question, she asked further.
Forgive me, Your Highness, but what do you mean by abnormal occurrences in a dream? Could you give me a better description or example?
Kusanali nodded, understanding that someone like Ganyu wasn't as experienced with irregular events and dreams as she was.
Of course. Allow me to give you a few examples of common determinants between dreams and visions. The most common one is experiencing or seeing something that is impossible to exist in reality, and if it occurs in a scenario as such, it is a dream. Dreams are usually reflections of memories and desires played out in the form of something like a play or film by your psyche, and most of the time, contain either impossible elements or scenarios that can't exist in reality. Did you experience anything like that during your supposed encounter with the Tsaritsa?
Ganyu took a long minute to recollect everything she could remember about the dream, going over every detail and the setting. The fog or mist on the floor was possible in reality as much as the gusts of wind, but she did remember one particular detail about the cold wind. She hadn't shivered when in cold conditions. She'd normally shiver as a response to warm herself up.
There was one occurrence that could classify as such. Seeing the place I was in was cold, but I didn't feel it nor shivered the entire time. Would that classify as something abnormal in the case of dreamscapes? In this case, it could and could not at the same time.
How so? Kuching added, actually curious about why the Archon had come to that conclusion.
Well, the coldness could also pertain to the Tsaritsa herself, seeing she is the embodiment of the cryo element itself. Also, seeing you described her being frail and weak, it could be a reflection of her emotions. That, along with the fact that I have no more questions, makes this a tricky case to determine. Therefore, before I decide anything else, do you recall there being any other oddities within the duration of the encounter?
Ganyu thought long and hard again about everything, but she came to no conclusion of having witnessed any other abnormal elements. With no other answers to give, Ganyu just shook her head as a response. Kusanali caught her response, and as a result, expressed a look of conflict and heavy thought.
All right. Thank you, Miss Ganyu. Seeing I don't have any clear answer, as much as I wish I didn't have to, I have no other choice but to enter her mind and explore for a more clear conclusion. Therefore, to do this correctly, we will need to find a place where she can rest comfortably without any risk of being awoken. It'll be safer for her and much easier for me to navigate her psyche if her body is in a calm and relaxed state rather than the latter.
Understood. Yelan answered. Lucky for us, Ganyu was raised in the mountains of Liyue, so she's accustomed to sleeping in even the harshest conditions. Ganyu couldn't object to that, having fallen asleep atop a haystack in the past, only to be awoken by a worried man who had loaded said haystack into his wagon, unaware of her being part of his luggage. It had caused a search party to be sent out by Ningguang, having feared that she'd been kidnapped or worse. It was an embarrassing story that had been told at several banquets in the past, and always ended in a fit of laughs. There was no doubt she was able to fall asleep practically anywhere. Therefore, she didn't deny the claim and just did her best to suppress her blush.
Perfect. Then that'll make this process faster, easier, and without heavy risk of damage,
the young god said, turning to Ganyu again.
Miss Ganyu, how do you feel about one of the beds provided by the inn?
That works fine, but I have one request in the task.
Of course. What's your request?
Ganyu turned her gaze to Kuching, said target meeting her irises immediately.
If it's okay with her, I'd like for Kuching to help me to sleep.
Kuching blushed with a smile.
Of course it's okay with me, as long as it doesn't interfere in Lesser Lord Kusanali's process. If it makes Miss Ganyu comfortable, I'm all for it. The worst that could happen is you falling asleep and entering with me, so unless you want to do the task with me, be sure not to fall asleep.
Understood, Your Highness. Kuching responded, putting a hand over her heart as a declaration.
All right, I'll arrange you a room in the nearby inn and meet you there tonight. For now, feel free to enjoy what Sumeru has to offer.
Yelan jumped into the conversation, adding her own comment to the mix. I'd like to catch up with what's happened in my absence, but you two are free to do whatever you want. Go ahead and break away from our current war with Snezhnaya for a while. After all, you two deserve some alone time together after 2 weeks of separation. Ganyu and Kuching nodded, catching the clear message of Yelan wanting them to have a day to themselves.
Thank you, Miss Yelan.
Kuching stated. Yelan just nodded as a response, following with Lesser Lord Kusanali concluding their meeting.
Please be safe, and I'll see you all tonight.
Likewise. Yelan answered, following with her turning and beginning to lead her comrades out of the sanctuary of Surislana. Let's go, ladies. Ganyu and Kuching followed her, waving the Dendro Archon goodbye. Kusanali waved back, and once the coast was clear, returned to her business prior to the discussion.
I wonder if those two are sisters or something, given they find comfort in one another's company. So interesting. Humans truly are amazing and unpredictable creatures.
Night had come faster than expected, and it was time for the truth of Ganyu's prior encounter with the Tsaritsa to be debunked as either a dream or vision of some sort. Throughout the day, Ganyu and Kuching had decided to satisfy their tendencies out in a remote area of the jungle, Ganyu having kept her promise by roughing up her beloved as romantically as possible. Less to say, it had tired both of them into a long sleep, up until they had awoken just 3 hours before sunset. To clean themselves of their act, they had taken a quick dip in one of the nearby springs and drowned themselves in the natural scent of the Sumeru rose after drying off in the rays of the sun. Due to their last visit, Ganyu knew how to extract the liquid from the stem of the plant, the trapped watery mixture carrying the scent of lavender. It was practically a natural perfume, and while it had taken over 20 to assure their dirty work had been covered up, it was worth the end result. Nothing was better than the natural essence of nature, and after making sure the majority of their hair was dry, they had started their way back to Sumeru City. Upon walking past the archway and up towards the same inn they'd confessed and made love in, the sight of Yelan and Lesser Lord Kusanali came into view. The two didn't seem to have any sign of annoyance painted on their faces, relieving the two lovers upon their approach. Kusanali was the first to see them, turning and greeting them with a smile.
Welcome back,
the goddess greeted.
You made great timing, seeing Miss Yelan just arrived not even 2 minutes ago.
A huge wave of relief washed over Ganyu and Kuching, glad that they had made good timing and had escaped suspicion of their act earlier in the jungle. Perhaps they could finally get through one night without Yelan knowing what they were up to in her absence. Their relief was interrupted by Kusanali, her expression having shifted from joyful and welcoming to something more focused. That was the clear indication that it was time to get to work.
All right, I've assigned all of us a room for the task at hand. Miss Ganyu and Kuching will enter first to do what's necessary to put Miss Ganyu to sleep peacefully. Once she's asleep, Miss Kuching will exit to initiate the next and most important step of the process, entering her mind. From there, it's basically a waiting game, seeing there's no telling how long this can take. Everyone else's job is to assure that Miss Ganyu doesn't awaken under any circumstances whatsoever. Does everyone understand the plan and their roles in it?
The others all nodded in agreement, to which Lesser Lord Kusanali initiated the plan into action.
Very well. Miss Ganyu and Kuching, please proceed into the assigned room and do what you must.
Ganyu and Kuching nodded at the command and started for the only room with an open door. Upon entering the room, the two immediately recognized it, said place being the very one where their relationship as lovers had begun. Kuching closed the door for the sake of privacy, then walked further into the room, flashbacks of the night she and Ganyu had loved one another intimately playing out before her eyes. It was nostalgic and beautiful as she took a seat on the edge of the bed next to Ganyu.
This is where it all began. No doubt Yelan had a say in where the mind delving would take place.
Indeed. It's probably a good thing that we got all of that done earlier, huh?
Kuching nodded.
If I'm being honest, I wouldn't be against another round. But I'm smart enough to know better.
Ganyu eased her beloved's thoughts with a light kiss to her lips, lasting no more than a second.
Another time. Now, let's get back to work.
Yeah.
Following that, the two moved into the bed, working into positions that they deemed comfortable and cuddling next to one another. They just eyed each other in the light of the room and shared the moment, Kuching lightly running her fingers through her love's hair to ease her into slumber. It worked fast and effectively, Ganyu's eyelids starting to droop shut from the soothing feeling of her locks being embraced by her beloved's soft fingers.
I wish we could be like this forever,
Ganyu stated.
Just laying in each other's arms, comfortable and happy. Funnily enough, this is the most sleep I've been able to get in hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Kuching responded.
I bet it's wonderful after all of those years of working yourself to the bone. I wish I could join you, but I don't want to damage those memories in your head.
Ganyu suddenly let out a long yawn, her eyelids nearly shut tight.
I need to go to sleep now. I'll see you when I wake, my love.
Ganyu stated sleepily.
See you soon.
Kuching answered back, falling with her planting a soft kiss on Ganyu's forehead.
Now go to sleep, silly.
Ganyu listened, closing her eyes and allowing the feeling of Kuching's fingers gliding through her locks to carry her to slumber. In no more than a minute after shutting her eyelids, Ganyu was asleep and breathing softly like a baby fresh out of their mother's womb.
Sweet dreams, Ganyu.
Kuching whispered, then carefully maneuvered herself from the bed back onto her feet. She slowly worked to the door and opened it as quietly as possible. At the sight of the door opening wide, Yelan and Kusanali initiated the next step of the plan. They met up with their fellow comrade and started to discuss what was to follow.
That was pretty good timing.
Yelan commented.
Then again,
Ganyu is an ace at falling asleep due to her Qilin roots.
Time is of the essence, so the more we save, the better. Is everyone aware of what they need to do?
Keqing and Yelan nodded confidently, assuring the Dendro Archon that she was safe to begin her task.
All right, then I suppose it's best that I get to work. There's no telling when I'll return, but I have confidence that you two can fulfill your part of the plan. We'll do our best to assure that Ganyu isn't disturbed, Your Highness.
Keqing assured, leading Kusanali to close their conversation.
All right, I'll see you two soon.
With the talk concluded, the young but mature goddess moved into the room, to which Keqing and Yelan shut the door and leaned back against the wall. They stood opposite to one another, similar to how bouncers guard an entrance to a private club. There was no telling how long they'd be guarding the room, but they didn't care. This determined the truth of their current matter, and if they didn't have to kill an Archon, they'd take the risk. Keqing closed her eyes and prayed in silence to the gods for her beloved to come out of this unharmed, hoping that as an Archon, Lesser Lord Kusanali could find the answer without causing damage to Ganyu's memory.
Gods of Celestia, please keep Ganyu and Lesser Lord Kusanali safe in this long and dangerous endeavor. For the sake of my love, and Sumeru's safety, and for the survival of Teyvat.
Upon entering Ganyu's mind, Lesser Lord Kusanali had been flooded with a looming sense of dread. The atmosphere was suffocating and desolate, nearly causing the young Archon to collapse before she could even get a good look of her current environment. However, she somehow kept herself on her feet, doing her best to fight the heavy weight pushing down on her shoulders violently. She knew she couldn't fall here, and knew just as much that time was of the essence. Therefore, using her godly abilities, she gave herself enough strength to continue.
Where am I?
She questioned herself, working to examine her surroundings. When she finally was able to think straight, she found herself in a place that resembled a forgotten and decrepit place with long, tall, and wide halls. A place like a church or a palace. The area was dark and ruined. The marble tiles that made up the floor were chipped and cracked, and the walls were littered with holes of all sorts of sizes. Debris also covered the walkway before her, along with dust and spiderwebs up in the highest corners of the massive ceiling. The state of the environment made the young matriarch clench her chest in sadness, knowing that it resembled something in relation to the main subject of why she'd come here in the first place. There was no doubting it, and Kusanali knew that she had to go forward and find her fellow Archon. She started down the corridor slowly and carefully, taking each step with caution to avoid potential injury from the litter covering the only path. While a tedious task, the young god found her way quickly, coming to a pair of two tall doors. Upon seeing the gargantuan giants, something caught her attention instantly that solidified where she currently was, as much as what awaited her behind the doors. A giant snowflake was carved into the wood, and that was the symbol of Cryo and the Tsaritsa. She was in the Zapolyarny Palace, and past the threshold before her was Her Majesty's throne room. She gulped at the sudden realization, not sure if potential danger awaited her beyond her current position, but she also knew that the fact she was in her fellow matriarch's palace of royalty was no coincidence. This had been set up by the Cryo Archon as a call out to her, and that meant she had to answer. She took a deep breath to calm her frenzied nerves, knowing she couldn't be afraid.
I hear you, Sister Archon, and I will answer your message.
She stated as a way of giving herself confidence, stepping up to the doors and pushing them open with all of her strength. The giants roared as they creaked open to the sight of something she hadn't expected. Just as Ganyu had witnessed, at the foot of the throne that the Tsaritsa should have been seated in was a bare-naked young girl shackled in chains. However, the most disturbing sight was not the Archon and the rusty restraints, but the person actually seated in the throne. The doctor sat comfortably in the royal seat with a devious smile on his face, his cold eyes staring Kusanali down like an eagle on the prowl for its dinner. It was a sickening sight to behold, the true Tsaritsa crying and praying internally for death to come and free her of her life of hell and torture. Her heart ached while her soul shivered at the monster glaring at it, but Kusanali kept herself composed. She was terrified, but now that she knew the doctor had become a factor, she had to remain strong and ready to leave the dream if anything went wrong.
Ah, welcome, Lesser Lord Kusanali. Nice of you to join us at this hour.
Kusanali's fists clenched in anger at his calm demeanor in such a horrible situation. The doctor saw that and chuckled at his prey, still holding his sinister grin.
Relax. I'm not going to hurt her if that's what you're thinking. No, I need this young beauty alive and well for the time being, seeing her purpose is not yet complete in what's to come.
It was infuriating. He was acting as if torturing this young goddess was nothing but an act for the greater good. And considering the young matriarch knew what it was like to be imprisoned for 500 years, she could tell exactly what the true Tsaritsa before her was feeling. She wanted to cry, but she knew now wasn't the time to. She had no clue what to say or do, but she remained ready to escape if the monster before her tried anything.
Why? Why are you doing this? How can you just sit there and continue to torture this innocent girl as if she's nothing but the ground you walk on?
Her exclamations caused the Tsaritsa to wince in surprise, turning her gaze to her fellow sister Archon with bloodshot and foggy eyes.
But, Booer.
Her voice was weak and painful, causing Kusanali's heart to ache more. Number 2 merely chuckled again, getting to his feet and folding his arms in malice.
Goddess of Dendro and wisdom, do you not know the truth about this world? I figured you would, given you are the one with direct connections to Irminsul. However, I know of your past, and that you are the branch the prior Dendro Archon chose to take in her place. Therefore, I suppose you wouldn't know everything about this world. So allow me to tell you of the bloody origins of Teyvat. The reason I seek to destroy this world is because of those very roots, seeing the creation of this world came with a malevolent truth. Before Teyvat, this world was once ruled by the elemental dragon sovereigns, the true incarnations of the elements and origin of their power. These beasts lived peacefully alongside those we know as the gods of Celestia in today's world, up until one befriended one of those sovereigns. That very action led to a culmination of humankind and the elemental dragons becoming friends, and that caused what would forever be known as the fall of the elemental sovereigns. Befriending the dragons led to betrayal and greed, because those that we know as the celestial gods took the power for themselves and used it to become gods themselves, forever weakening the true masters of the elements. Those monsters left their respective friend to wither away, and used their new power to create a new world. That very world is the one we live in today, and the gods that reside in Teyvat are the children of those murderers that took the power from the true rulers of this world. However, one thing that those killers didn't know about the elemental dragons was that when one dies, they are reincarnated as a whole new being. Unfortunately,
They feared that possible outcome, so to make sure that the new dragon sovereigns couldn't take away their power in retaliation, those cowards made their own kingdom and ascended it to where the dragons couldn't reach them. The kingdom now known as Celestia. Kusanali was shaken, but didn't know whether or not to believe him. However, that made her question one thing, seeing there was one flaw in the whole story. Why would he target the Archons and all of Teyvat if the only ones to blame were the celestial gods? If what you are even saying is true, then why would you target Teyvat's people if the gods of Celestia are the ones to blame? It's quite simple, Your Highness. While the celestial gods are the ones at fault, simply killing them isn't enough to cleanse this world of all the blood it is stained with. No. To truly rid this world of all of the sins those bastards above committed is to start anew. By ridding Teyvat of every single being that resides in it, the current elemental dragon sovereigns will die along with it, and with that will lead to new ones birthing from the ashes. That way, the elemental dragons will once again take rule over this world, just as it should have been from the very beginning. She was shocked. If this was actually true, the doctor wasn't necessarily wrong in his actions. However, she wasn't evil nor insane like him. Knowing global genocide wasn't the answer to what could be the true origins of Teyvat. You're insane. Killing the entirety of Teyvat will not amend the sins of the celestial gods, because you'd be creating a new world out of tactics no different than theirs. If anything, you'd only be repeating history and ending lives for no reason except your own selfishness. He chuckled again, remaining calm. Oh, Bua. Of course you'd say that, seeing you were born out of the passing of knowledge and wisdom from your predecessor. I'm not insane, nor am I selfish. I'm just doing what's best for this world of bloodshed and strife. I am human, while you are a fragment of the very species that betrayed and stole the power from the true matriarchs of Teyvat. The same goes for this piece of trash that I easily took possession of with little to no effort. And with her power, along with the other ones I've leashed, I will blow Celestia out of the sky and burn Teyvat to nothing but ash. Please know that I don't blame you or any of the other worldly gods for the origins of this world, but to start anew, all of Teyvat must perish. If you truly care for your people and Teyvat, you will not try to stop me. No matter your choice, I won't stop until this world is nothing but a barren land of what used to be Teyvat. Therefore, I await your arrival in Shneznaya, and truly do hope you make the right choice. We will stop you, no matter what it takes. He shook his head in disappointment. We'll see. When the time comes that we meet, you just may find that your choice may not be the same. Until we meet again, Bua. The goddess suddenly felt a force attack her, feeling her connection with Ganyu's mind sever. She flew backwards, and upon meeting the end of the corridor she had arrived in, she blinked back into reality. Upon opening her eyes, Kusanali fell backwards onto the floor. She yelped upon meeting the floor, causing Ganyu to stir from her slumber and act. She rushed to Kusanali's position on the floor and immediately noticed that the young god's demeanor was something that raised worry. Her eyes were wide, sweat covered her forehead, and her breathing was rapid. Ganyu hadn't witnessed what the matriarch had, so she was completely clueless as to why Kusanali was so shaken.
Your Highness, are you okay?
Ganyu asked worriedly. While scared stiff, the goddess heard her, doing her best to recapture her composure.
Don't worry about me. I'm okay. Just shaken.
She paused to catch her breath, not wanting to cause Ganyu any anxiety. It took a minute for her to calm down, but after a good amount of time, she was able to finally speak.
Miss Ganyu, please bring Miss Yelan and Kuching in here. I've learned a lot, and it's important for them to know.
Ganyu's nerves danced at the tone of her voice, a clear undertone of fear and danger being evident. However, she didn't question anything and just nodded, getting up from the floor and hurrying to the door. Opening the entrance to the cool outside air, Ganyu waved her arm as a signal for her two comrades to follow. Kuching and Yelan caught the sign and wasted no time in joining Ganyu and Kusanali in the room, making sure to close and lock the door. Upon one glance at the Dendro Archon, both Kuching and Yelan immediately knew that something drastic was amiss. Kuching especially recognized Kusanali's demeanor as one of shock and fear, having seen herself in the same manner in the reflection of the bathroom mirror of her room during her temporary stay at Wangshu Inn. She knew that whatever the goddess had encountered was something she wasn't expecting to find, and strong enough to shake her to her core.
Is she okay?
Kuching questioned worriedly towards her beloved.
I don't know. She's been like this ever since I woke up. I don't remember anything, so I have no idea what she saw.
Kuching nodded, to which she turned her attention to Kusanali. However, before she could open her mouth to speak, the goddess suddenly shifted in her demeanor.
I saw him, the true enemy of this war. There's no doubt in my mind that Miss Ganyu's experience in her psyche was real, and that there's much more to this than we originally thought.
Kuching and Yelan winced in surprise, confused at the second part of Kusanali's statement.
What do you mean, Your Highness? What exactly did you see?
The young matriarch turned her gaze to Yelan, a serious look painted on her face.
I witnessed the true reason of why this ever came to be, as much as discovered how he managed to capture those you hold dear to your hearts.
She paused briefly, taking a deep breath before continuing. She could see that she had everyone's attention front and center, so she gave them exactly what they wanted to hear.
The Doctor doesn't just seek to end the world of humans and worldly archons, but the kingdom of the celestial gods as well. He wants to eradicate all life to recreate a world without sins that were wrongly committed by those very beings above the heavens.
She followed with explaining everything that she saw in the brief time she had in Ganyu's mind, making sure to include every detail and aspect that mattered. She spoke low enough to avoid any potential eavesdropping, and at the end of it all, Ganyu, Kuching, and Yelan were stunned in disbelief. They finally knew the truth of why their home had been sunk into the ocean, as much as who their true enemy was. However, there was one thing about the entire truth that conflicted with their judgment, seeing the celestial gods were the cause of all this chaos, tragedy, and grief. With that said, was their enemy both the Doctor and Celestia?
If what that bastard said is true, then the gods above are just as guilty.
Kuching stated with an undertone of anger.
However, it's clear that we can't start a war with the Celestials, seeing that it's certainly a war that we can't win. The destruction of Conria is enough evidence to prove that, as much as the eternal winter of Dragonspine. It's good that you understand that, Miss Kuching. While the celestial gods did take the elemental dragon sovereign's powers wrongly, they weren't the ones who attacked and destroyed your home. Our true enemy is the Doctor, and we must stop him from carrying out his plan for world domination. As much as free the Tsaritsa of his control.
Ganyu added.
In other words, we must prepare ourselves for battle against Nezhnaya and the Fatui Harbingers.
Kuching and Yelan both nodded in agreement, fully confident that their objective was clear and that it was time to come up with a plan to end the Doctor's life once and for all.
Then I suppose it's time to rendezvous with our comrades in Mondstadt and form a solution to end this war for good.
Yelan added. Kuching and Ganyu nodded in agreement, allowing Yelan to conclude the conversation.
All right, let's rest here for tonight and head out at dawn. We're going to need a good night's rest if we plan to be at our best.
Agreed. Kuching stated in understanding, leading to Kusanali closing the meeting.
Then I wish you all a great rest and a safe trip back to Mondstadt.
Thank you, Your Highness. You stay safe as well. Kusanali smiled, then took her leave with a wave back up to the sanctuary of Surasthana. Once the goddess was gone, the three took a moment to wish each other a good night before departing to their respective slumbers.
Kusanali got me a separate room, so you two get your own private room. Have a good night together, but don't have too much fun. We gotta be up and out early.
Hey, who said we're going to even be doing that?
Well, for one, your reaction is enough to prove I'm right. Another way to tell is the fact that you two haven't had any action for over 2 weeks. Do you seriously think I didn't hear you two that night?
A massive blush adorned Kuching and Ganyu's faces, grateful that they hadn't decided to engage that night in the camp. However, despite the clear awkwardness of the situation, there was no doubt they'd be taking an opportunity to love one another that night.
You should see your faces right now. Now, if you two don't mind, I'm heading to my room for the night. Have fun, girls.
With that, Yelan took her leave to her own separate quarters, leaving Ganyu and Kuching to have the night to themselves.
Sometimes I really want to smack that lady across the face.
Kuching stated, her blush still evident in the light of the room. Ganyu just giggled, following with her walking up to Kuching and giving her a light kiss on the lips. All of the embarrassing nature of the situation prior faded away from Kuching's mind, Ganyu's embrace replacing it with a blissful sensation that made her hormones rush and mind fall to a drunkenness. The lock lasted a long 5 seconds, up until Ganyu broke it and stated one thing that drove her partner into action.
Shut up and strip me already.
The tease was enough for Kuching to not even hesitate, smiling deviously and moving her beloved to the bed for a much-needed night of pleasure and love with the one she loved the most. The return to Mondstadt had been a trip that had felt like the equivalent of dragging lead blocks that weighed 10 tons along the way. They knew the full truth now, and what they needed to do to avenge the people that they once knew in their years of life in Liyue Harbor. Those who they lost that night had not left their minds for one moment since their home went into the ocean forever, and their hearts beat proudly in assurance that they were ready to pay the Doctor back 100-fold. The battle ahead wouldn't be easy to achieve victory in, and Ganyu, Kuching, and Yelan all knew that very well. Their plan to invade and kill any who stood in their way in their pursuit for their target would have to be perfect, because there would be no opportunity to retreat. If they lost within Snezhnaya's borders, there would be nowhere to run and hide. They were practically intruders entering a hornet nest, and once they stepped onto the docks of the Cryo Empire, it would be do
or die. This fight would be all or nothing, and only one side would emerge victorious. The price of loss would be the end of humanity and Teyvat, so this would be the determination of the fate of their world. Extinction, or living to see the world continue to run its course in history. The stakes were higher than even the most bloody and tragic war in Teyvat's existence, and there was no telling what would happen once they met Snezhnaya's borders. It made all three of them fearful, but proud that they had defied the odds set by the doctor, all thanks to Reshov sparing Ganyu's life that fateful night. That mistake had given Teyvat and its people a fighting chance, and they would make sure that their efforts wouldn't be in vain. Once they made it back to the capital of Wind and Freedom, they had informed Jane and Diluc of the cold and dark truth the doctor had relayed to Lesser Lord Kusanali, and had confirmed that Ganyu's encounter had indeed been real. After inquiring everything, the two had become fully aware that it was time to take action, and had decided to give Yelan, Ganyu, and Keqing time to rest and recover from their trip. That had been the best decision, seeing formulating a plan that decided the fate of the world would require everyone to be at their best. From there, the three had taken residency in the same inn that Ganyu had stayed in, now fully reconstructed back to a livable condition, and have been doing their best to mentally and physically prepare for what could potentially be the end of the world ever since. 3 days have now passed, and in those days, Ganyu and Keqing especially have been doing their best to treat every minute as if it were their last. There was no telling what would occur in the conclusion to the war in the short future, and they both knew very well that that implied potential fatality. Death was something that came with war, and even if they didn't want to believe it, they knew that they'd lose comrades in their final battle. It was a harsh truth that they couldn't deny, Ganyu having witnessed it firsthand in the Archon War. She lost hundreds of people she called friends in those years of bloodshed and violence, but she had carried their memories onward into the current era. Now, she had to carry them furthermore on the battlefield, and hope that their spirits would keep her safe. These thoughts were all she could think about with each passing day, treasuring each moment she still had with her beloved while she was still there, alive and well. Keqing was in the same boat as her love, making sure to hold Ganyu close to her every night she went to sleep. Over those 3 long days and nights, she'd treated her beloved as if she were all she had in the world. She had kissed and made sure to let Ganyu know she loved her to the ends of the world, knowing there was a possibility that she would die on the battlefield. Inazuma had merely been a test of will in comparison to what the coming battle would be, and she could only shiver at the thought of what awaited her once she stepped onto Snezhnaya's snowy lands. It wasn't just the android she had to fight now, but the entirety of the Tsaritsa's Fatui Harbingers and whatever awaited her on the road to the laboratory below Frostcap Island. She'd heard stories about the horrors of the Archon War from Ganyu, and those alone had made her entire will quake in fear. What would she witness in the conclusion to the war with Snezhnaya yet to come? The two lovers' minds were the equivalent of a hive of angry bees that had been disturbed by an intruder as they lay under the covers of their provided bed together. While Ganyu wasn't as affected due to her years in the Archon War, Keqing was worse for wear, unable to sleep and constantly stressed and paranoid. Even though she was in her beloved's arms, she felt as if they were far apart from each other at the thought of losing Ganyu to the doctor or one of his twisted creations. An endless form of torture that inflicted her soul with an unimaginable amount of grief and fear, knowing that once a messenger arrived at their door one of the mornings in the coming days, they'd be heading for Snezhnaya's shores. Her greatest fear at the moment, and the main reason her eyes were wide open in the darkness of the room. Something her partner had caught and couldn't fall asleep knowing about, to which she addressed calmly.
"Can't sleep?"
Ganyu said, her eyes still shut tight.
"No."
Keqing answered in a tone of sadness and fear.
"You?"
Ganyu shook her head as a response, peeking her eyes open and shifting her body to where she met Keqing's gaze.
I can't sleep knowing you're clearly troubled. So rather than trying to hide it, can you please tell me what's going on?
Kuching was caught, and rather than troubling Ganyu further, she just reluctantly nodded her head as a response, her next set of words coming out as a shallow whisper.
I'm terrified, Ganyu.
She stated, tears starting to build up and her voice beginning to tremble.
I can't sleep knowing what's coming. I'm so scared that I feel sick to my stomach.
The words made Ganyu's heart throb, having a hunch of what was going on. This was something she too had experienced in the past, prior to her first major battle in the Archon War. However, rather than assuming, she just continued to listen.
Ever since it was clear that the final battle was next, something attacked me. Something drastic that has made me realize the potentiality of war. The potential of losing all those we've come to call comrades or friends. The chance of losing everything we just got back. The horrid possibility of losing you.
Ganyu's assumption had been correct. She knew exactly what was happening and what had attacked Kuching. The preliminaries of war, a horrid realization that would make anyone act the same.
I don't want to lose everything that we have now. I can't live without you. I don't want to be alone.
Kuching lost it, lunging into Ganyu and crying relentlessly. An action that Ganyu accepted and worked quickly to resolve with comfort and sympathy. She knew this pain and just how much it hurt. It was a cruel blend of potential truth that could possibly become reality in war, and that was a horrible feeling. Both of them had already lost their homes, acquaintances, and lives in Liyue Harbor, and had just managed to find light in the darkness. Now going into this final clash could possibly destroy it all, and could potentially lead to a much more devastating outcome. Something that even the strongest willed couldn't survive mentally. While the war may end in victory, what would be the cost of it all? That was a question she didn't even want to know the answer to as much as Kuching.
Hey, it's okay. I'm here.
Ganyu comforted, rubbing Kuching's back and kissing her lightly on her head.
I'm not going anywhere. I promise.
Kuching continued to cry for a long time until her body was finally unable to produce tears to shed. Once she'd had enough time to calm down, she gently pulled away from Ganyu and took deep breaths. She sat up slowly from under the sheets and hung her head, exhausted and worn from her anxiety.
I'm sorry, Ganyu.
She said in a low voice.
I don't know what's come over me.
Ganyu joined her partner, sitting up and putting her right arm around Kuching in assurance and understanding.
Don't be sorry, Kuching.
She comforted.
I love you, and I'm here for whenever you are troubled. I know exactly what's causing you to feel this way, and it's something that even the strongest can't face alone.
Kuching expressed a look of confusion and guilt, unsure of what her love meant.
What do you mean?
She questioned.
Well, simply put, it's your body realizing the cold truths of war that can potentially come true. And just like how you get overly stressed over certain things, it attacks and throws you into a constant state of fear and paranoia that such truths will happen. Given the circumstances of our current reality, and how this all started. You are simply scared of losing everything you've gained back after the destruction of our home. A completely normal reaction that I faced several times in the Archon War.
Kuching didn't budge, but she did catch what Ganyu was saying. The fact Ganyu was her beloved and partner for life made her feel guilty for keeping her awake when she needed sleep. She sighed heavily before speaking again.
Still, I can't help but feel guilty for keeping you up.
She replied guiltily.
You need sleep, but you're kept up because of my problems.
Ganyu shook her head, gently rubbing Kuching's shoulder in assurance that she wasn't annoyed.
Your problems are mine as well, Kuching,
she assured.
Just like how you comforted me when I woke up screaming in Sumeru, I will comfort you when you are troubled and hurt. That's part of being in a relationship. So please, stop thinking you need to face these things alone because you think it annoys me. I love you more than anything in this world, and I'm here to help you through everything I can. It's not your fault that all of this came from nowhere at a time when none of us were prepared. However, just like before in Inazuma, I'll be there with you on the battlefield when the day comes to fight for the fate of Devat. As long as we remain together, nothing will never stop us.
Kuching's anxiety started to calm a little from the words of her beloved. However, that small chance of her lingering thoughts and fears coming true still remained, and that wasn't something she could just let go of.
I know, but what if these thoughts do become reality? I don't know if I'll be able to go on if I lose you, or any of our comrades.
Ganyu nodded, knowing exactly what was going through Kuching's head. She felt exactly the same, but at the same time, couldn't let fears of what may happen hold her back from doing what was right.
I understand that fear is there, but at the same time, you can't be afraid of what hasn't happened yet as well.
Ganyu informed.
As we've seen, fate and destiny are unpredictable aspects of life that can bring both happiness and tragedy. All things happen for a reason, and whatever happens in the near future is nothing we can stop nor alter. However, that's the future. So instead of worrying about what is yet to pass, we should embrace what we have now and live our lives to the fullest. If we always fear the future, then our lives will be nothing but a miserable existence. So we should be happy while we still have the chance to be.
Kuching's lips curved into a smile as she raised and turned her head to Ganyu's own, her nerves now resting and calming down. Her beloved was right. Life is short and precious, even for a half-adeptus, half-human like her that had lived over 3 millennia. There was too much to live for in the present. Therefore, she should treasure the time she has now rather than fear the future that has yet to play out in short time. She nodded her head with her wide smile still beaming confidently.
Figures someone with thousands of years of knowledge would know just what to say,
she stated in a calm manner.
While I'm still not mentally ready for the finale to this fight, knowing that you'll be there with me when that day comes makes me feel better. And until that day arrives, it's best we enjoy every moment we have left.
Ganyu chuckled in relief, leaning in and lightly locking her lips with Kuching's, lifting all of her partner's worries away into the calm night. Upon releasing the brief embrace, Ganyu closed the night with another hint of advice.
Then please listen to this wise lady and close your eyes. I'm absolutely sure your body is ready to fall into a deep slumber.
Kuching nodded with a light giggle, a sudden yawn escaping her mouth as a clarification that Ganyu was right and that she was finally ready to go to sleep. Kuching laid back under the covers and cuddled up against Ganyu's chest in full comfort and relaxation, her mind clear and body at peace. I love you, Ganyu. I love you too, Kuching. Sleep well and sweet dreams. Upon closing her eyes tightly, Kuching was out in minutes with a smile on her face. Ganyu wasn't far behind her as her eyelids collapsed shut into a sweet fantasy land alongside her beloved. The meeting room was quiet as Jean took position front and center with a map of Teyvat as her background. 2 days had passed since the incident with Kuching, having grown more confident with the impending war just beyond the enclosing horizon. She and Ganyu had just spent their time in those 2 days relaxing and enjoying one another's company while awaiting the messenger to arrive at their door. 2 knocks had met their ears just hours prior, and now they were sitting in silence in wait for what their comrades had devised over the past near week. Both were holding hands underneath the table to comfort their growing anxiety, knowing that this was the moment they'd been leading up to ever since the night they'd lost everything they held dear to their hearts. This was the retribution for Liyue Harbor and all of those who lost their lives they'd been searching for. And now it was time to put it into full action. Thank you all for coming today. Jean started. Over the past days, many have worked hard to devise the best strategy to enter Snezhnaya's borders, infiltrate the Zapolyarny Palace, free the Tsaritsa, and pursue the Doctor under Frostcap Island. And with the aid of Sir Diluc, Captain Beidou, and Captain Kaya, have found the solution to what we think is the most effective and safe way to assure no casualties. Therefore, I'll allow Sir Diluc to take over and begin explaining everything in full detail. Following that, Diluc got up from his seat and worked his way to Jean's position, standing just off to her side. He then turned to face his audience and explain his part of the entire scheme. As you all know, I've had agents of mine watching our enemy's territory for months now, and over that time, I've secretly asked them to provide a detailed map of where we will be traveling by ship to. Less to say, Snezhnaya's borders consist of 2 forms of security: watchtowers and a gate that requires a certain license to pass. Luckily for us, Captain Beidou has one of these said permits due to her dealings of deliverance of cargo to the ports of the Cryo capital. That will be our way through the gate, but that poses an issue as well for our fellow reinforcements that will be joining us along the way. We will need all of the help we can get in a showdown against not just a goddess, but her highest-ranked soldiers that will certainly be a force to reckon with. Our fellow comrades, Miss Ganyu, Kuching, and Yelan, and Captain Beidou have all witnessed how powerful one of their lesser-ranked harbingers can be, and if that's anything compared to a low rank, then we will be in a battle unlike any other before we can even touch the Tsaritsa. Remember, our goal is to not kill anyone if possible, but if the situation falls to kill or be killed, then you have every right to protect yourself. However, let me back up for a minute, seeing there may be a possibility that we can avoid combat with harbingers, but only by a mere shred of luck. Part of this plan involves something we all disagreed to, and that was to accept the Tsaritsa's proposal. The entire room gasped in shock, but Diluc quickly worked to explain exactly why he and Jean had made the decision to do so. Hold it. Before anyone starts throwing any questions or accusations, allow me to explain why we thought that was the best option. By accepting the proposal, that eliminates 2 factors that we'd face otherwise: suspicion of our true intention, and potentially being caught during the infiltration of the palace. This way, we can enter the palace and get straight to the source without any sort of trouble or struggle. The first phase of the plan is for our fleet to enter the palace, Then once we're inside, our reinforcements will engage Phase 2 by entering the borders of Snezhnaya and taking out the guards at the gate. From there, they will enter and engage Phase 3 by navigating to the port to begin heading for a very crucial source that will give us an advantage: the communication hubs for the Fatui. Once they infiltrate the city, that's when we will need to be ready, because it is likely that a Fatui soldier will alert the Tsaritsa or her harbingers of the invasion. We will have a time window of about 14 minutes in between our arrival in the palace and our allies' infiltration. So unless we manage to persuade the harbingers and avoid combat, we just might be in for a bumpy ride.
I have a question, Sir Diluc,
Kuching asked.
Who all will be infiltrating the palace? Seeing if a fight happens, 11 Fatui harbingers is not an easy obstacle to arise victorious from.
Diluc nodded in agreement, speaking his answer. You, Ganyu, Jean, and myself will be the ones to enter. If you remember correctly, Miss Kuching, the letter stated mainly for government officials that were involved to attend the signing. If we sent in anyone outside the requested criteria, it would raise suspicion and put us in a risky position. Kuching nodded in understanding, finding the answer fair and reasonable, even if the thought of facing the Tsaritsa and her best made her spine quiver in anxiousness. With his comrade's curiosity resolved, Diluc turned to the task at hand. Now on to Phase 4. Shall we make it that far? This will be when we hopefully bring the true Tsaritsa back and start heading towards Frostcap Island. By the assumption that we earn an alliance with the Fatui Harbingers, we will find and enter the secret lab and work with all of our allies to kill the Doctor and save the Adepti and the Geo-Archon he is holding hostage. This phase is more of a gray area that is subject to change, depending on how our infiltration of the palace will go. We have already taken the initiative to meet with the other nations regarding this plan, and will meet them to discuss this as well. Ms. Yelan will travel to Fontaine, Ms. Ganyu will go to Sumeru, Ms. Kuching will sail with Captain Beto to Inazuma, and I will meet with the Pyro Archon, Murata, and Natlin. We will relay this information to their respective leaders, and prepare for the long trip to Snezhnaya via the Alcor in a roughly estimated time of 1 week. Does anybody have any questions?
Immediately, an arm went up, the owner of it being their main leader of transportation. I have one concern regarding Snezhnaya's gate. Captain Beto started. The guards of the gate do a routine check on all luggage to avoid stowaways getting in. So how do we get past that?
Diluc nodded yet again. Excellent question, Captain. Luckily, we thought of that possibility and had a plan just in case. However, I must ask, how thorough are their investigations for unwanted cargo?
They mainly just open the tops of the barrels and boxes to look for intruders. They never look beyond that because unless they can see anything to be suspicious about, they are forbidden to remove any luggage.
Diluc's lips curved into a smirk that showed he already had a solution. Perfect. Then all we have to do is hide anybody who'd be considered a stowaway in a barrel and cover them with something that would hide them from sight. Fruits like apples or oranges should be sufficient enough, seeing they're lightweight and wouldn't crush the person hiding away.
Beto expressed her own smirk, nodding her head in agreement that the idea was solid and effective enough to work.
Heh. Gotta hand it to you, Sir Diluc. You can be clever when you wanna be. In that case, I'll need some extra barrels and enough fruit to hide away our comrades.
I'll ask around while I'm in Sumeru, Captain.
Yelan added.
I'm sure I can get some for a good price. Same here.
Kuching chimed in.
There's plenty of merchants in Inazuma that I'm sure have some spare barrels and produce.
All right, I'll be counting on you two.
Beto stated as a closing to the discussion, to which Diluc took an opening.
Does anyone else have any questions or concerns?
Ganyu's arm rose high up, having caught one critical issue with Phase 1 of the plan. I have one concern regarding the infiltration of the palace. How will we defend ourselves if one of the conditions is to discard our weapons before entering? In documents I've seen in the past, there have been attempts to assassinate the Tsaritsa, so a customary action that was added in meeting with her is to rid every guest of any potential weapons.
An understandable concern, but I highly doubt that will occur due to the circumstances of our reasoning for seeing her. Asking us to drop our weapons under such circumstances is an action that could cause us to change our decision of making peace, and that's not something our enemy wants. If the doctor's goal with this clear attempt to make us drop our guard is to succeed, then he won't risk anything. Remember, he invited us, so as the tradition goes, he will show us respect rather than disrespect. We can refuse to drop our weapons out of the purpose of our own safety, shall things go wrong. That's a reasonable request, and he'd have no choice but to oblige.
Ah, I see. We use his own ploys against him to our advantage.
D-Luke nodded in assurance, closing the question and allowing any others to jump. Nobody moved or raised their arm, allowing the meeting to reach its close and initiating the plan into action. All right then, once everyone involved is ready, you may begin your journey to your chosen destination. This meeting is adjourned. With that, Ganyu, Kuching, Yelan, and D-Luke stood up and started out of the office to speak one last time before they took their leave to their respective capitals. These trips would be crucial, seeing it was vital that all of the leaders of each nation came to agreement with the plan. Time was short, and they needed to work fast to avoid suspicion from the doctor. You three look nervous, and that's completely understandable. This will, by far, be your most important mission yet, given the time window we have to arrive in Snezhnaya without any suspicion from our foe. I have no doubt that I can get Fontaine's leader to listen to reason, seeing they're very passionate about their people. Yelan assured. The same goes for these two, seeing we've risked our lives to protect their nations. So now, it's time for all of us to unite and protect Teyvat. Given how cooperative the Raiden Shogun and her subordinates were with protecting Inazuma, I highly doubt she'll refuse to help us. Kuching added. Not to mention Miss Kokomi and her army as well.
I agree.
Ganyu chimed in.
Lesser Lord Kusanali is very reasonable and wise, so I'm sure she will know what to do.
Then it sounds like you three know what to do. Well, I must convince Murata of Natlan that we'll need her forces to defeat a true monster. In short, it seems like all of us have work to do. So I bid at least Miss Ganyu and Yelan farewell, seeing Miss Kuching will leave later tonight with Captain Beidou. Good luck to you, and watch yourselves along the way. Ganyu and Yelan nodded in assurance, turning and starting out of the Knights of Favonia's headquarters with Kuching tailing them, down to the lowest ring of Mondstadt City. Upon meeting the city's main fountain, the three stopped to just breathe and look at the sights of Mondstadt. They'd be separated and without peace for a while, so it was best for them to take time to embrace the peace while they still could. Once they were ready, Yelan was the first to talk. Well, I suppose this is goodbye for a little bit, ladies. She stated with a hint of emotion. Hard to believe we've made it this far, huh? Yeah. Kuching spoke. After all that's happened, we're one step closer to retribution. It feels like an eternity since that night, but here we are. Yelan nodded, following with a sigh. I'm really glad you two survived. Otherwise, Leeway Harbor would have been nothing but a forgotten memory. It's because of us that hope still exists, and that our original home is not just a place that was forgotten when it went into the sea. Visible tears in Yelan's tear ducts gleamed in the sun. a smile on her face as she looked at her two friends. Our survival was a twist of fate, and when the day comes that we meet the gate to Snezhnaya, we'll show that twisted harbinger what happens when you mess with the wrong people.
Mm-hmm.
Ganyu and Kuching responded confidently in unison, to which Yelan nodded and started to take her leave to the Hydro capital. I'll see you two soon. She finished, then turned and began her long trek to Fontaine. That left Ganyu and Kuching time to bid each other farewell, to which Kuching started with turning to meet her beloved's gaze. Well, here we are again, she stated with a hint of sadness, not wanting to be separated from Ganyu again. Don't be sad, Kuching, Ganyu comforted. It's not forever. Kuching nodded, reaching out and taking her beloved's hands in her own. Stay alive and well, Kuching requested. Remember, you promised me that you'd be there next to me on the day we enter Snezhnaya. I will, Ganyu promised, following with pulling Kuching to her and giving her a goodbye kiss. Kuching accepted and held the kiss for a long minute, up until she let go. I'm going to miss that so much, Kuching stated. I love you. Ganyu giggled as a way of adding happiness to the situation, ending her procrastination with a final set of words. I love you too, Kuching. Good luck, and stay safe until I get back. Cross my heart. Kuching finished, letting go of Ganyu and watching as she disappeared down the steps and out of the gate of Mondstadt. With the hardest part over, she turned her focus back to her main objective and started back to the inn to get ready to set off to Inazuma with Beidou. One week later. The day had come, and everyone set to head for the land of their enemy was a frazzled mess. Ganyu, Kuching, and Yelan's trips had gone off without a hitch, seeing all of the nations, excluding Snezhnaya, shared the same enemy. There had been no hesitation from all parties, and over the past week, had prepared everything for today, the day they hoped to end the doctor's life and the war. That was much easier said than done, and every single individual involved knew that the oncoming hours would be the most grueling and taxing they had ever faced. It was literally do or die, and that was a frightening thing to accept. However, all of them knew this day had been inevitable, and now they were just less than 5 hours from docking the Alcor at Snezhnaya's shores. The crux in the entire roster of the Knights of Favonius would set off in 2 ships from Falcon Coast to their very first obstacle before they could officially enter the Snezhnayan waters. That roadblock was the security border known as the Miraz Gate, guarded by not only higher-rank Fatui soldiers, but also snipers posted on towers. They would have to be absolutely careful to not stir any suspicion. Otherwise, those snipers wouldn't hesitate to sink or kill whoever ended up in the crosshairs of their rifles. That wouldn't be for hours, but the very thought of just how careful they were going to need to be made everyone's nerves dance as they assisted in loading the ships with everything they'd need. As for their fellow reinforcements, they were already on their way, having left much earlier due to the distance they'd have to travel to get to Snezhnaya after them. Those reinforcements were Fontaine, Inazuma, and Natlan's armies, along with their archons, seeing that fighting a god would require the greatest of strength in Teyvat. That power level belonged to the worldly gods and elemental dragons, so they'd need said matriarchs to face the might of the Dr. Saritsa puppet. Keeping them safe in their nations wouldn't matter if the end result was failure, seeing the Doctor already had the control of 2 gods,
and that was enough for him to succeed with his end goal of world domination. There would be no second chances. Whoever remained standing after the dust settled would decide the fate of Teyvat. After 2 long hours of packing Beto's ship with all of their necessities, it was finally time for Ganyu, Keqing, and Yelan to board the Alcor and travel to their foe's homeland. A trip that would likely take up to 3 or 4 long hours, hence why they decided to start their trip just past the crack of dawn. A slightly chilly breeze blew amongst the shore of Falcon Coast, Ganyu having walked off to the side to just enjoy the sun peeking over the long sea for potentially the very last time. She was standing with pride, proud that she'd made it to this day. The day she'd fight for the retribution of Liyue Harbor and the people who were killed that night she had awoken to 3 knocks at her door. She clenched her fist tight and let out a long breath to calm her nerves. She was scared, exhausted, proud, and angry all at the same time. A feeling that was said to be one that only occurred in a moment prior to something mentally and physically effective to the host. A sensation that every single comrade on Falcon Coast shoreline was sharing with her in anticipation for the arrival at Zeppeljärni Palace in the center of the cryo capital.
The morning sunrise sure is a sight, isn't it?
A familiar voice suddenly interrupted her train of thought, to which Ganyu turned to see her beloved just off to her side with an unsure look on her face.
You got butterflies in your stomach too?
Ganyu nodded, turning from the view of the sunrise to Keqing.
I just wanted to have a moment to look at the sunrise, given that today could be our last.
Keqing nodded in assurance, walking closer to the shoreline, just off to the left side of Ganyu.
It truly is captivating that these small things are the most important at the end of the road.
Keqing commented.
Any other day, we'd be too focused on other things to stop and admire the natural beauty of the world. Now, here at the finale to what we've been fighting for, even the simplest of things are as precious as a finely cut diamond. It's amazing how things can change at the risk of potentially losing everything. The world works in mysterious ways.
Ganyu replied.
When you really think about it, things like this were once the greatest mysteries to those who first walked the grounds of Teyvat. Beautiful marvels that couldn't be explained, only admired as phenomenons that brought wonder, curiosity, and peace to their minds. They'd admire it every day as a gift from some higher power, and thank them for gifting them such a divine thing they could see every morning.
Ganyu paused briefly at a sudden flashback of a memory that brought tears to her eyes. Keqing saw it and quickly acted to address the situation.
Ganyu, are you okay?
She questioned worriedly. Ganyu nodded her head, wiping away her tears with her fingers.
I'm fine. I just remembered something related to this.
She confessed, letting out a long, sorrowful breath.
Cloud Retainer and I used to watch the sunrise before training every day, while having our morning cups of herbal tea. It was a routine she claimed that was beneficial to help me focus and progress faster. And she was right. Perhaps the reason I decided to admire the morning view today was due to that connection.
Keqing could see the hurt and pain in her beloved's eyes at the thought of her adoptive mother and mentor, to which she put her right hand on Ganyu's left shoulder in comfort and assurance.
Hey, we'll find her,
Keqing assured comfortingly.
And I'm absolutely sure she knows you're still fighting for her and the other Adepti.
A smile crept onto Ganyu's face, reaching and placing her right hand onto Keqing's that was still resting on her shoulder.
I know we will,
Ganyu replied confidently.
We have to.
To further her comfort, Kuching turned into her beloved's chest and wrapped her arms tightly around her. Ganyu returned the gesture and pulled Kuching more into her body, allowing the warmth of her body to lift away any of the butterflies still flying around in her stomach. They hugged for a long time in the comfort of each other's love and assurance that they wouldn't be torn apart in the coming battle against the doctor, up until another familiar voice broke their personal serenity. "Hey, lovebirds, it's time to set sail." The voice of Yelan called, to which Ganyu and Kuching separated and turned to admire the view out from them one last time. "Ready to go and end this war?" Kuching asked. Taking in a long breath and releasing it slowly, Ganyu took her beloved's hand tight and answered confidently in the rays of the morning sun. "Let's go and finish this." When the Alcor had officially sailed into the borders of Snezhnaya's waters, the temperature had severely changed in seconds. The mild chill of your usually early morning breeze had shifted to something more on par with mid-winter winds, and a light mist covered the surface of the water. The mist wasn't thick enough to the point of a whiteout, just enough to determine that they were indeed in the cold and foggy seas within proximity of the cryo capital. Many of the occupants of the top deck had changed into warmer clothing to avoid freezing to death, the temperature only getting lower and lower the closer they got to the Moraz gate. Ganyu and Kuching were dressed in spare coats that they'd bought during their trips to their assigned capitals, having chosen blue and purple as their preferred colors. Yelan already had her own jacket as much as Diluc, the latter having traveled to Snezhnaya before and very much aware of the conditions. Surprisingly, Beidou and her crewmen had taken no liberty to change into warmer clothes, but that was due to the fact that they'd grown accustomed to the harsh cold after making this trip likely hundreds of times. The only hazard, aside from the freezing winds and temperatures, was icebergs or just ice in general along the surface of the water. However, those were usually maintained by gatemen that surveyed the waterways that led to the Moraz gate, seeing merchants were a vital resource to Snezhnaya, and that meant that travels had to be without troubles of any kind. It was now 20 minutes ever since they'd passed the borderline, and upon the alert from the crewmate positioned in the crow's nest, they'd come within the vicinity of their first challenge. Quickly, all crewmen moved to their positions to get the Alcor to slow down to a stop, knowing the soldiers manning the gate wouldn't lift a finger to avoid a collision. Luckily, they'd done this procedure hundreds of times, and less than 60 yards from the Moraz gate, the ship started to settle to a speed slow enough to avoid damage. Their stopping point wasn't visible up until they were 40 yards from it, two lights being the first sign of something being along their course. Upon coming into a full visual of the structure, Ganyu, Kuching, and Yelan's eyes bulged in shock. It was gargantuan in size, being over 100 feet high with two non-vacant sniper towers atop it, extending out beyond the farthest they could see past the fog on both sides, and being entirely composed of concrete. The area they were approaching consisted of two walkways extended out from the main structure, wide enough for a ship to dock for inspection, and having a set of flashing yellow lights on each side at both ends that acted as mini lighthouses. Off to the left side was the main control station being manned by one soldier in heavy winter clothing, and two others off to the side. The Alcor came to a dead stop before a thick concrete wall that acted as a security barrier against intruders, to which everyone who needed to act prepared to take action. Beidou, being the captain, was the first to move, signaling for everyone to just let her do the talking as she crossed the deck and prepared to do the proper proceedings to get onto the concrete platforms below safely. She deployed the rope step ladder that extended all the way down to just above the water's surface and started her way down carefully. The robust captain found her footing quickly on the left platform, then awaited the main runner of the gate to approach her. It didn't take very long, the heavily clothed trio making their way to her position and beginning to address the protocol that was the norm for any case. "Morning, Captain Beidou," the main gate guard greeted, having met with Beidou several times in the past. "You know the drill by now, right?" "Of course," she answered in a casual tone. "I'm delivering mainly cargo for the businesses in Snezhnaya, along with something else." She followed by reaching into one of her pockets and pulling out a neatly folded paper, the letter from the Tsaritsa that would give a clear message to the gate guard that it was best to not keep them for too long. Upon seeing the stamped emblem of the Zaplyarny Palace, he didn't even bother reading any further and returned the letter to Beidou's possession. "Understood, but due to the war, one of our requirements is to check for stowaways or contraband," he informed. "If you refuse, we have no choice but to turn you around. Her Majesty isn't taking any chances as of now, and will accept if you are a little tardy." "Completely fine with me," Beidou assured, knowing there was no way they'd find anything. Ganyu's enhanced hearing caught the conversation, to which she alerted one of the deckhands to head for the storage bunker to warn their hidden comrades. They all had hoped that the letter would allow them to skip the inspection process, but as expected, the doctor wasn't a fool that had taken every precaution to avoid any risks to his plans. The deckhand caught Ganyu's signal and worked quickly below deck to give the heads up to those hiding in barrels. Everything had to go perfectly to get through without suspicion, and as soon as the guards boarded was when the real challenge would begin. A visible mist of breath escaped Ganyu's mouth out of slight irritation and stress, but she quickly brushed it off, knowing her emotions couldn't interfere with their temporary obstacle. "Just breathe and stay calm. This isn't your first time in a situation like this, Ganyu." About 5 minutes later, the gate guards and Beidou were aboard, the three soldiers eyeing the entire deck like a trio of hawks stalking prey. It was clear that they weren't amateurs that couldn't be easily fooled, seeing they knew what to look for as potential illegal cargo. Diluc and Jean took the initiative to approach the inspectors, knowing better how to handle this kind of situation. "Salutations, gentlemen," Diluc welcomed. "I am Sir Diluc, and this is Acting Grandmaster Jean of Mondstadt's Knights of Favonius." "Greetings," Jean added. "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintances." "Likewise," the guard responded. "Captain Beidou has already informed me of your purpose for wanting to enter, but due to the current war, we are required to check for anything like weapons or substances that could threaten the citizens or Her Majesty's safety. I do hope you understand and are willing to comply." "Absolutely," Diluc answered. "We wish not to bring any danger to Snezhnaya or the Tsaritsa, but we will abide as a way of building trust between one another." The guard nodded, starting the inspection. "If everyone present would please form a straight line, we can get this done as quickly as possible." All on the deck complied willingly and lined up to be patted down and checked, the process having taken about 2 minutes to complete due to the winds and cold making hearing difficult. Once every occupant was back to back with one another, the main guard began the task with Beidou at the front. It was nothing more than a sequence of lightly patting down everyone and checking any potential hiding areas on their person. The latter had been mainly their jackets and pockets, seeing there wasn't much more potential storing areas for something like a knife or contraband. The checks went by fast and easy, nobody being dumb enough to pack away something that clearly wouldn't make it past the security border. Once everyone was clear, all that remained was the cargo, and that was the much bigger risk. "All right, all of you are in the clear," the guard assured. "Now, we'll run a check on the luggage for any unwanted stowaways. Please give us about 10 minutes or so to get everything checked." Nobody said a word as the three made their way to the lower floors of the ship, and all they were left with was hope that those hiding in the barrels wouldn't get caught, and the sheer cold breeze blowing gently over the top deck of the Alcor. A long time passed as every crewmate and comrade-in-arms prayed not to hear any sound of a commotion below their feet, the only person with a good perspective of what was actually happening being Ganyu. She could hear every footstep, every lid of every barrel being lifted, every breath of her allies hidden beneath the apples and oranges stacked atop their heads. The three officers didn't seem to be catching suspicion of anything, nor were they planning anything malicious in secrecy, and that was a huge relief to Ganyu. She only wanted the doctor's head. These three inspectors were doing nothing but their job and hadn't done anything to her or her fellow soldiers. If she could avoid killing someone, she would. Never would she allow her emotions to turn her into someone she wasn't again. The three guards returned to top deck, and didn't look like they'd caught onto what was really hidden below their feet. That was the first victory they needed, but it wasn't any reason to celebrate. The real battle was yet to come, and once the gate before them opened, only then would the fight for Tevat's existence officially begin. "Everything checks out," the guard informed. "Thank you all for complying with our customs, and please enjoy your visit with Her Majesty." With that, the trio onboarded the ship and worked to do the proper actions to open the massive concrete gate. Beidou rolled the stepladder back up, then worked to her position as captain to steer the ship forward. All of the Crux fleet followed by moving to their positions as a sudden eruption of an alarm started to ring, indicating that the gate was in the process of opening. The massive concrete walls started to lift up at a safe speed, causing the gust from the other side to blast through along with the eerie mist that coated the surface of the sea. It felt like the gateway to hell had opened before them, only instead of flames and blazing heat, it consisted of blistering cold winds and misty waters. However, it was fitting for someone like the doctor, having a heart as black as coal and cold as ice. It fit everything you'd expect on a day of reckoning, and it was only bound to get worse once they passed the gateway. With the path open again, the Alcor started to slowly glide forward, allowing everyone to breathe normally again. The hardest part of getting into Snezhnaya was accomplished, and that had been the most important step. However, now that they were in the Hornet's Nest, there was no turning back, and the only way they'd ever go home was through victory. A task that was easier said than done, and would come with a great cost of more than just casualties. Whatever came ahead was now inevitable, and soon this regular sunny day would become hell on Earth. Ganyu could already see it, looking out beyond the bow of the Alcor towards what would become their battlefield. Kuching was by her side looking out as well, dreading that this had become the reality of their world. They didn't speak or move an inch, just watched as through the thick fog, a snowy mass of land came into view. The land known as the Cryo Goddess's homeland, Snezhnaya. It was beautiful and lively with thousands of people, a harsh truth that stung the hearts of the two as Beidou joined them on the bow. She too stared alongside her comrades, watching as they inched closer and closer to the docking area. A long moment passed before the still of the moment was finally broken. Nothing like a cold day in hell, huh, ladies? Beidou said in a mellow tone. Ganyu and Kuching turned at the sudden comment, their faces holding sorrow and pain along with Beidou's. "It sure does feel like it, doesn't it?" Kuching answered. "I feel horrible that the innocent people of this place have to endure everything that's coming. But what else can be done otherwise?" Beidou nodded in agreement. "Today will be hard for all of us, especially Lady Ganyu, seeing she has already faced the unspeakable horrors of war. But we all must remember two things if we want to accomplish what we came here to do. If we can save lives, we will. And if we can't save lives, we can't." Ganyu was the first to understand that completely. remembering her promises to the Tsaritsa vividly. If she had to kill the Tsaritsa puppet to save her, she would. And if lives had to be lost to do the right thing, she wouldn't hesitate. These factors were just one of the many horrid realities of why war was the most evil and tragic thing that anyone could ever experience. It was pointless, traumatizing, and only ended in blood. One life for another in the name of conflict and pride. Don't worry, Beto. We are fully aware that it's likely that not everybody is going to make it out alive. Kuching assured, it's a reality I've come to accept after everything that's happened. That's good, Lady Kuching. Beto replied. In war, nothing is set in stone, and it usually brings the worst things anyone can ever imagine. Therefore, to survive a war, you have to be prepared for anything and do whatever it takes to make it out alive. Remember that, and maybe we all can go home. Kuching nodded confidently, Beto's words sending a chill down her spine. They sounded as if they were spoken from the embodiment of death itself, and were less of a hint of advice, but more of a goodbye if they never met again. She didn't say anything against it, only watched as Beto returned to the stern to steer the ship into the docks. As she attempted to turn back to the view of Snezhnaya, she was suddenly stopped by Ganyu, speaking on Beto's behalf of what she couldn't say. You understood it, right? She questioned. What she meant by those last words? Kuching nodded with a heavy sigh. She was saying goodbye, just in case she doesn't make it today. Kuching confirmed. And how do you feel about it? Ganyu persisted. Another sigh escaped Kuching's mouth, knowing she was fully aware of the implications of what Ganyu was truly asking. It hurts, but it's also something I can't be resentful at, seeing she's right about the truths of war. Kuching confessed. There's no telling what will happen today on the battlefield, nor knowing who will survive and who won't. Therefore, goodbyes are something best said now before it's too late. Good, Ganyu assured. Accepting it now is better than not at all. It's better to die knowing you at least got to say one last thing to someone you love and care about, than to die with regret that you didn't. That's what's going through Beto's head right now, along with likely the majority of everybody else aboard. Kuching nodded, looking into Ganyu's eyes with sorrow. Then, should we say goodbye to avoid dying with that regret? She questioned, causing Ganyu to wince. She took a second to think Kuching's words over, only to come to a conclusion that she had thought impossible back before she'd found love. Goodbye isn't necessary, because I promised to find and live with you eternally in death. Therefore, I wouldn't die with regrets on my mind, only assurance that I had lived a great and beautiful life with the one I love the most. And I will fulfill that promise, no matter what. Kuching smiled briefly, pulling Ganyu closer to her. Then promise me that you'll do everything you can to make sure that we can return home and live together for the rest of our lives. I promise, and expect you to do the same in return. Ganyu agreed, putting a hand on Kuching's left cheek. Kuching nodded as an answer, then gave Ganyu a light kiss as a way of solidifying it. Ganyu accepted and kept her lips locked with her beloveds for a good amount of time, up until the docks of Snezhnaya came within yards, and they knew it was time to get serious. What a cold day in hell indeed. Kuching stated as the Alcor bedded itself into the port, and the mission to free the Tsaritsa, kill the doctor, and save Tevat's existence officially began. It was indeed a cold day in hell in the icy lands of Snezhnaya that would soon turn into an all-out blazing inferno that would determine the fate of the world.